Hello everyone. Today we are doing the degree of carbon and hydrogen and alkyl groups and functional groups. So these three topics we are discussing today. First we are discussing degree of carbon and hydrogen. Okay, so how it depends upon it is on the basis of number of carbon atoms to which that particular carbon is attached. We call it as the degree of carbon. So by example we will discuss the degree of carbon and hydrogen. So now we can take an example of ethane. Because in methane only one carbon is there and that carbon is not bonding with another carbon. So we will start from the ethane. Alkane is having two carbon, we call it as ethane. So in this case, this one carbon is bonding with this one carbon. Means this carbon is bonding with only one carbon here. So they have a degree 1. So we just call them as a primary carbon. In this case also it is a primary carbon. And the hydrogen which are getting attached with this primary carbon, they are also called as a primary hydrogen or a primary. This is the first degree of hydrogen. So primary hydrogens. Here also same thing, primary hydrogens and primary hydrogens. So next we will discuss about the propane. In this case, alkane is having 3 carbons, so we just call them as a propane. So in this case, this end carbon is attaching only with the one carbon, so we call it as a primary carbon. In this case also it is a primary carbon, and this carbon is bonding with the 2 carbon here, so we just call it as a second degree of carbon. And the hydrogen which are attaching with the first degree of carbon, we call it as a primary hydrogen only. So these 3 are primary hydrogens, these 2 are secondary hydrogens, and these 3 are again primary hydrogens. So this is the degree of carbon and hydrogen. Now we will discuss about the butane. So butane is having 4 carbon. It is alkane having 4 carbon. We call it as a butane. Okay. So in this case, end carbons always they are having primary carbon only. Next, this carbon is bonding with a 2 carbon, so it is secondary. Again it is a secondary carbon, and to the secondary carbon whichever hydrogens are getting attached, we call them as a secondary hydrogen. In this case also secondary hydrogen. So in case of butane, we are getting 2 degree of carbon. Here is the first degree of carbon, the second degree of carbon, second degree of carbon, and first degree of carbon. Again we will discuss about the pentane. Now we can do this butane only. We will just make it in a branch form. Okay. In this case, this carbon is bonding with only one carbon, so we just call it as a primary. And this carbon is bonding with a 3 carbon, 1, 2 and 3. So we call it as a tertiary carbon. And hydrogen along with this tertiary carbon is there, so that hydrogen also tertiary hydrogen. And this carbon is bonding only with one carbon, so primary carbon. This is also primary carbon because it is bonding only with one carbon. And this hydrogen, 3 hydrogens having primary carbon. These 3 hydrogen also having primary carbon, so we call them as the primary hydrogens only. Next we'll discuss the quaternary carbon. So we can take an example of pentane. So this carbon is bonding with the 4 carbon. So we call it as a quaternary carbon. In this case, no hydrogen is there. Here is a primary carbon. Again, it is bonding with 1 carbon only. So we call them as a primary carbon. And it's a 3 primary hydrogen. So 3, 6, 9 and 12. So 12 primary hydrogens are there in this pentane. So now we will do the one chart. 1 degree of carbon is having 1 degree of hydrogen. Second degree of carbon is having second degree of hydrogen. The tertiary carbon is having tertiary hydrogen. Quaternary carbon is having no hydrogens. So this is a chart, we can remember it for our better understanding. Okay, so next we will discuss about the alkyls. So what is meant by alkyl? As we know, alkane. Already we discussed about the alkane series. It is in a saturated hydrocarbon. So by a saturated hydrocarbon, so we can take any example now. Methane. From this we are removing one hydrogen. Then it is getting methyl. So this is called alkyl group. For example, now we can discuss here alkene minus one hydrogen. We call it as a alkyl. In case of methane, we call it as a methyl. In case of ethane, C2H5. See, we'll just draw the structure so we can understand better. So in this way, we can write, and later we are removing one hydrogen. Because both are primary carbon only, so we can remove any hydrogen, no issues in this ethane. So now we are removing one hydrogen, that is primary. So now we are getting CH3, CH2. So we call it as a ethyl. We can write like this also, CH2, CH3. This is also called ethyl. Next we will discuss propyl. So from propane, one hydrogen if you remove, here this end carbons they are having primary carbon, and it is a middle carbon, it is bonding with a 2 carbon, so we just call it as a secondary carbon. If we are removing one primary hydrogen, then how we are going to write here CH3, CH2, CH2. So this is, we call it as a propyl. And it is an unbranched or chain for it's a straight chain, so we just write here N propyl. Again this is the N propyl. If we are writing this in the form of CH3, then this L form of shape is there, that time we are writing in the form of isopropyl. This is the case of primary carbon if you are removing, but in second case also we have to discuss. If you are removing a second degree of carbon, a second degree of hydrogen, then which kind of structure will be there. Now we are removing the second degree of carbon. So how the structure will be? Second degree of hydrogen. In this case, CH3, CH3. This is the structure. This also how we are going to write it? Propyl. Or same, propyl only. But we have taken here second degree of hydrogen, so we are writing here secondary propyl. But exceptional case is there. We are not supposed to write here secondary propyl, because Only in propyl we are just, instead of secondary, we are taking isopropyl. Okay, next we'll discuss butane. In that we will clear our doubts. In butane, 4 carbon will be there along with their valency with the hydrogen. Okay, in this case, this is the primary carbon again. This is also primary. This is the secondary. This is the secondary. So this is a butyl actually. So in this case, there are 2 degree of carbon 2 times. So now we are removing 1 hydrogen here of primary carbon, then CH3, CH2, 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 like this we are going to represent it. We call it as a butyl, and it is a unbranched straight chain, so we call right here N butyl. And now if we are removing second degree of hydrogen, then how we are going to write it? CH3, CH, CH2, CH3. So we'll write here N butyl, not N butyl, because second degree of hydrogen we are taking here, sorry. So we are writing here secondary butyl, secondary butyl. This is the case of butyl. In butane, if you are removing the hydrogen from butane, then this is the kind of structure we are getting. Now I will discuss about the pentane. So in this case, this carbon is bonding with the 4 carbon. So we call it as a quaternary. This is a primary. This is also primary. This is also primary. How we are going to write it in alkyl form? So now CH3. If you are removing primary hydrogen, then CH3, CH3. It is a pentyl. We call it as a pentyl. But here carbon, this on the second carbon methyl group is there. So we just write here 2-dimethyl pentyl. Because on the second carbon 2 methyl groups are attached, so we call it as a 2-dimethyl pentyl. Okay, next we will discuss about the functional groups. So what are the functional groups? Functional groups. An atom or a group of atom or a group of atoms which makes carbon more reactive, and decides its chemical properties we call it as a functional groups. Functional groups. So we are discussing functional group each by each. Okay. So now we'll make one chart here. Functional groups. Formula. whether we are using prefix or suffix, and examples. Okay, so now we are discussing about the halogens. So how many halogens are there as we are using as a functional group? So chlorine, bromine, fluorine and iodine. So these halogens we are using, and we have same here the formula we can write here: chlorine, bromine. This is not a dash, this is not a minus, it is a dash which we are representing in the form of valence here. So bromine and fluorine, iodine. And here we are using prefix only. So before starting any compound, like for example we are taking a methane. In this methane, one hydrogen is replaced with a chlorine. This is a functional group. So this chlorine will decide its chemical properties. So how we are naming it? Chloro. So we are using chlorine as chlorine, this halogen, as a prefix. So chloromethane, chloromethane. Next we are for the second carbon, 2 carbon alkane, we just call it as ethane. So that ethane is in this ethane, if one hydrogen is replaced with bromine or iodine or any fluorine, so we just, how we are going to write it or how we are naming it? Bromoethane, like this. So now the second functional group we are discussing now, that is alcohol. Alcohol functional group formula is OH. Example, we are using OH, alcohol OH, and its suffix we are using as a OL. Example we can take methanol. Methane, in this one hydrogen is replaced with OH. Then we call it as a methanol. In ethane, if hydrogen is replaced with OH, then we call it as a ethanol, like this. Methanol, ethanol, propanol, butanol, we are writing like this way by using functional groups of alcohol. Next we are studying aldehydes. So aldehydes formula is C double bond OH. So we can take an example of propane. Ethane also we can take, no issues. In this case, so this is called propanol, because suffix we are using here as a Al in case of aldehyde. So propanol. Ethane, in propane, one hydrogen is replaced with this aldehyde group, that is C double bond OH. So we are writing as a propanol. In case of butane, if one hydrogen is replaced with aldehyde, then how we are going to write it? So this is called butanol. Like this, butanol, pentanol, hexanol, we can write it. Next we will discuss ketone. Ketone has a suffix ONE. Ketone. Formula of ketone is C double bond O here. Ketone. This is the formula of ketone. So we can use it in the propan. In ethane, we cannot take ketone group. Why? Because at least for the ketone, at least we need 3 carbons. to represent this formula. So in case of ketone, we are taking, in case of propane, we are taking 3 carbon and functional group C double bond O and then CH3. So this is, we just write it as a propanone. 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 ON is the suffix will be there. Then same like propanone, butanone, pentanone, we can write the structure. Next is carboxylic acid. Carboxylic acid. Carboxylic acid, it has a formula COOH or C double bond OH. We can write anything. Out of these two, we can write anything. And here suffix is OIC. For example, methane. If you take not methane is not possible. Ethane, if you are taking, methanoic acid also is there. So ethane, in case of ethane, this is called ethanoic acid. We call it as acetic acid also. So ethanoic acid, like this we can take a propanoic acid, butanoic acid, pentanoic acid, we can take in this way. So today we discussed alkyls, functional groups and degree of carbon and hydrogen. So tomorrow we will discuss the nomenclature. So that is very important. So we will discuss it tomorrow. Thank you.